General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Friday, May 2, 2025. First, when Dante and Lulu sat down together, the atmosphere seemed to still. And time itself felt as though it had paused between memories and wounds left unhealed. Lulu, with eyes still bearing traces of the long months spent in a coma, began to slowly share the emotions that had been buried in her heart. There was no anger, no blame, only a quiet recounting of the things her heart had never been allowed to say. Dante's initial silence made everything feel fragile, but as Lulu spoke of the time they had once shared, of the belief they once held that love could conquer all, his eyes gradually grew misty. He could not stop the surge of emotions as Lulu described the dreams she had while asleep, dreams in which he had always been there, waiting for her with each breath. Lulu continued, her voice growing softer as she brought up something she had once overheard, a truth she had carried with her even when she wasn't fully conscious. She spoke of the pregnancy Brooke Lynn once had when she was only a teenager, and how the child was Dante's. The revelation had once shaken her deeply, but now, in this moment of honesty and surrender, Lulu simply wanted Dante to know she didn't blame him, nor did she blame Brooke Lynn. She understood that when people are young, they make mistakes, hide truths, or remain silent, not out of selfishness, but often to protect the ones they love. She saw now that Brooke Lynn had carried the burden of that truth for years, not because she was cowardly, but because she believed that saying nothing was less harmful than speaking up. Dante froze, his mind swept back to the years when he was still just a boy trying to become a man. And Brooke Lynn was a fiery girl carrying her own private storms. The memories he had once buried came rushing back, those reckless days when they skipped class, dreamt of a life without worries. And how it had all vanished in an instant. He had never imagined that Brooke Lynn had shouldered something so enormous at 17, something so defining, without ever letting it show. And now, hearing it from Lulu, his heart clenched with an ache he couldn't fully name. What overwhelmed Dante even more was Lulu's grace. She admitted she was thankful for Brooke Lynn, not because of the child, but because perhaps Brooke Lynn's silence had spared him a heartbreak he couldn't have handled back then. Lulu had risen above her own pain, above the natural jealousy and betrayal, and instead chose compassion. Not everyone could do that, especially someone who had lost so much. But she wasn't denying the sorrow. She had simply chosen not to let it define her. She knew she hadn't come back from the edge of death to live in regret, but to live meaningfully, with empathy and strength. Dante finally reached out. Not with words but with a trembling hand that closed around hers. Her hand, once cold and lifeless, was now warm, quivering with emotion. No more words were needed. Between them lay a past that could not be erased, a present full of complexity, and a future still veiled in uncertainty. But in that moment, Lulu chose forgiveness, and Dante chose silence. As a way of honoring the truth and the unconditional love she had shown him. From a distance, Brooke Lynn stood silently in the shadows, watching the scene unfold with tearful eyes. She couldn't hear what Lulu was saying, but Dante's expression, the way he held Lulu's hand, said enough. A part of her felt a sense of release seeing Lulu strong enough to face the truth. But another part of her cracked as she realized the secret she had buried for so long had hurt them both more than she had ever intended. Brooke Lynn had never sought forgiveness. But perhaps now, she needed to speak, if not for herself, then for the child who was never born, a tiny soul who once lived within her, a memory that would never fade. And on that quiet, windless night, as three hearts burdened by three different kinds of pain crossed paths at a fateful intersection, a new chapter began to unfold. Second, Nina confided in Carly about everything that had happened recently, sparing no detail, because she believed only Carly was strong and shrewd enough to understand the necessity of what she had done. On a tense evening in a high-rise office, where the city lights below flickered like blurred streaks of emotion, Nina began to share every step of her plan with a voice that was equal parts proud and calculated. She had paid a professional escort, someone skilled enough to perform convincingly without leaving a single trace of the mastermind behind the scenes. Every detail was meticulously arranged. From the setup of the room and the glasses of strong liquor, to the hidden cameras strategically placed in corners. And the precise timing to strike when Drew was emotionally vulnerable following a recent legal setback. It was all done in the shadows, unseen, undetected, and, most importantly, untraceable. When Nina showed Carly the first still images taken from the carefully edited footage she now possessed, Carly couldn't look away. Though she had often opposed underhanded tactics in the past. This time, she couldn't deny the brutal effectiveness of Nina's strategy. In the captured frames, Drew appeared unmistakably caught off guard, unguarded, disarmed. And falling straight into the trap Nina had set. He didn't resist the seduction, and that alone dismantled the carefully cultivated image of a devoted father and loyal man. Carly said nothing at first, but a faint glint of silent satisfaction sparked in her eyes. It wasn't that she took pleasure in seeing Drew fall, but rather that she finally recognized Nina had crossed the line from being a wounded woman to becoming a calculated force, a rival no one could afford to underestimate. Carly nodded. Slowly but firmly. She knew exactly what would happen when Willow saw those images. Willow, who had always believed in Drew's sincerity and devotion, would be shattered. She would question everything, love, loyalty, even her own judgment. What Nina was aiming for wasn't just to hurt Drew. She was going after the fragile trust that Willow still clung to amid all the storms. Nina wasn't merely breaking a relationship, she was unleashing a storm fierce enough to tear apart everything Willow thought she could control. And Carly, who had endured too many betrayals of her own, didn't condemn her this time. Instead, she understood. She understood that rage, when left to fester, becomes fire. And Nina was burning it all down. Piece by piece, to reclaim what she believed she deserved. Neither woman needed to say aloud what both were thinking. Once those images were released, Drew wouldn't be the only one to fall. Willow would be pushed to her emotional limit. And when a person reaches that edge, they either break, or become dangerous. Nina was gambling everything, and for the first time in a very long time. Carly stood beside her, not as a reluctant ally, but as a shadowed witness to a perfectly orchestrated downfall. Third. Mac had just settled into the quiet rhythm of his day when he was unexpectedly approached by Lulu and Dante. Their expressions were grave, their urgency unmistakable. As they laid out the purpose of their visit, Mac's demeanor shifted from casual curiosity to focused intensity. They weren't there for a routine update or a favor, they had come with a request tied to a buried truth, one that reached back into the shadows of Brooke Lynn's past. The child she had once carried as a teenager and had, for reasons known only to her, disappeared from everyone's knowledge, possibly abandoned, or hidden, or worse. As Lulu recounted the story, her voice steady but heavy, Mac sat in stunned silence. It was not often he was caught off guard, but the implications of what he was hearing were staggering. A child, tied by blood to Dante, may have lived all these years somewhere out there, lost in the system or swept away by Brooke Lynn's private anguish. Mac's initial disbelief was quickly overtaken by the gravity of what this meant. This wasn't just a cold trail from years ago, this was a potential life that had been erased from records, a person who may have been denied the truth of their identity. And now, that life could be in danger, or at the very least, in need of reclamation. Despite the surprise, Mac's sense of justice overpowered hesitation. He had always been a man rooted in duty. Someone who valued the truth even when it was messy or uncomfortable. Though he had known Brooke Lynn for years, had seen her grow from a reckless girl into a determined woman. He had never imagined she would carry such a secret. But he also understood the fear that came with youth. And the desperation that sometimes led people to make choices they would carry in silence for the rest of their lives. More importantly, he saw the determination in Dante's eyes, not as a cop, but as a man who might have been a father all these years without knowing it. Mac agreed to help. He promised to discreetly open an off-the-record inquiry. Leveraging both official databases and personal contacts from his years in the force. He knew where to look: hospitals that took in underage patients with pregnancy complications, shelters where young mothers might have left their infants without names, and a web of private adoption agencies that, in the early 2000s, had more than once skirted the edges of legality. He also understood the need for silence. Brooke Lynn's reputation, her family name, and most importantly, the emotional weight of such a revelation, all required delicate handling. As Dante and Lulu left his office, there was a new storm brewing inside Mac, not just of duty, but of personal responsibility. He had seen too many cases where truth came too late. And he refused to let this be one of them. Somewhere out there, a child who had been abandoned or hidden deserved answers. And even if Brooke Lynn had made the choice out of fear or confusion, it was now time for the past to answer for itself. Fourth. Lois had never imagined this day would come. The day when a past she believed had long been buried beneath layers of painful memories would be dragged back into the light. And not by a tabloid leak or whispered rumor, but by her own son. When Dante arrived, his serious eyes and composed yet heavy voice made Lois's heart beat faster than it had in years. She had always been a woman who could think quickly on her feet, whether in heated family arguments or legal battles involving large sums of money. But this time, she felt something inside her crack wide open: the truth. Dante didn't waste time with pleasantries. He asked the question directly, not with anger or accusation, but with a quiet urgency that left Lois with no place to hide. He wanted to know about the child Brooke Lynn had once given birth to as a teenager, the child that had disappeared without a trace and was never spoken of again. In that moment, Lois felt the air in the room leave her lungs. Memories rushed over her like a tidal wave: soft infant cries in the middle of the night, Brooke Lynn's shattered eyes, and the devastating choice Lois had made in fear and desperation, convinced it was the only way to save her daughter's future. Lois had once believed she did the right thing. When Brooke Lynn became pregnant at just 16, the family had been thrown into a storm of shame and panic. Brooke Lynn was fragile, nearly destroyed by the weight of it, and Lois, as her mother, had stepped in to protect her the only way she knew how. She arranged, in secret, for the child to be placed with another family, a home where the baby would have a chance at a better life. A life untouched by scandal or sorrow. All the paperwork was handled discreetly. And Lois carried that secret in silence, never telling anyone, not Ned, not Dante. Not even Brooke Lynn once she began to recover. But now, standing in front of Dante, a man she had always considered a son in every way, Lois realized silence was no longer an option. She felt herself teetering on a precipice between love and betrayal, protection and destruction. If she told the truth, everything could unravel. Brooke Lynn might never forgive her. Dante would be thrown into a whirlwind of emotional chaos, and the child, wherever they were, could see their entire world turned upside down. But if she kept the truth hidden, she would carry that guilt with her to the grave, and deny all of them the chance to right a wrong that had festered for far too long. In those brief but weighty seconds, Lois knew she had to choose. She was no longer the young woman who could avoid consequences with a clever lie or graceful redirection. She was now a mother, a grandmother, and the sole keeper of a truth that had the power to change the lives of 3 people. She took a deep breath, her chest tightening under the pressure of time and regret. The answer was clear in her mind, but the weight of it hung heavily on her lips. Finally, Maxie was no stranger to crises. She had faced her fair share of unexpected challenges, quick decisions, and emotional turbulence in the ruthless fashion industry and in her personal life. But when she received an ultimatum from Sasha, someone she once stood shoulder to shoulder with through thick and thin, she never imagined it would be the moment that left her completely shaken. Sasha's words weren't a gentle reminder or a plea for compromise, they were cold, firm, and pushed Maxie into a corner with very little room to escape. Sasha had been silent for far too long. She had endured, suppressed, and sacrificed for people she thought were protecting her. But this time, the calm was gone. She laid everything bare, from long-buried disappointments to the feeling of betrayal upon realizing that Maxie had sided with decisions that had caused her deep pain. Sasha was blunt. Either Maxie publicly chose to stand by her as a true friend, or she would continue aligning herself with those who had treated Sasha's life like a puppet show. For Sasha, this wasn't about work or responsibility anymore, it was about dignity, trust, and reclaiming the reputation and identity she had fought so hard to rebuild after her personal collapse. Maxie was stunned, frozen in place, each of Sasha's words cutting through her like a knife. She had never anticipated the depth of Sasha's feelings, nor imagined that someone once so fragile could now deliver such a resolute ultimatum. Known for her quick thinking and diplomatic finesse, Maxie now felt entirely out of her depth. It wasn't just the anger in Sasha's voice that shook her, it was the realization that her actions, though not malicious, had wounded someone who had trusted her deeply. She began to take a step back, not out of fear, but because she understood something deeper was at stake. Perhaps, in the chaos of work and life's demands, she had truly overlooked Sasha's emotional reality. Maybe she had said things she thought were harmless, but had unknowingly triggered the very wounds Sasha had fought so hard to heal. The idea of being distanced from someone who had been a true ally during her darkest days left Maxie feeling adrift. Of all the battles she had fought, she had always believed in the sanctity of friendship, until now.